Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Shane Beamer, the South Carolina Gamecocks, Thursday afternoon, making another, what I would say is a sneaky, intriguing addition late in the spring transfer portal window as former Houston Christian and Incarnate Word offensive lineman Nolan Hay committing to South Carolina. Now, this kid checks a lot of boxes that you're looking for, especially with some of these late spring portal window additions. He's played in over 2,200 snaps in his college football career, made 7 starts as a true freshman in 2022. Not only has he played in over 2,200 snaps, this is a guy that has made starts at center, guard, and right tackle during his college career. Now, I know South Carolina likes him at center a lot, and we're going to talk about why they probably like him at center and brought him in. You're talking about experience. You're talking about versatility. This ain't going to be a national media headline. But when you're South Carolina and you make no mistake about it, like South Carolina wants to win 10 plus games in the SEC in the 2025 year, you got to be deep along the lines of scrimmage. I mean, how many times do we see really good college football teams suffer an injury or two on the offensive line, have to shuffle that? They go to 10 wins to 7 wins real quick. And if you're South Carolina, you want to make sure you're deep enough to make a run late in November and potentially make a run in the college football playoffs. And a guy like Nolan Hay, who's played a lot of college football in his day, trying to make the jump to the SEC, I think that's an intriguing addition. Now, reading a little bit about why he committed to South Carolina, this one kind of fired me up a little bit. Said, hey, I want to snap the football for the future Heisman Trophy winner. Love it. Love it from Nolan Hay. And this is a kid that was unranked out of high school. Look, I ain't saying he's going to be Cam Ward and kind of come to South Carolina, be a first-team all-SEC guy. But I will say this, he was unranked coming out of high school, worked his way up the college football landscape, and is now looking to make that transition and play at the highest level of college football. Like, it's hard not to root for this kid coming to South Carolina. Want to get a little bit more into Nolan Hay, talk about what I saw from him as I buzzed a few of his games. Before we get into it, as always, South Carolina fans, appreciate you guys. Y'all been rocking with the boys as we talk some of the biggest storylines and some of the nitty-gritty conversations as well. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one now. Why did South Carolina make the addition of Nolan Hay? Why did they want to add another offensive lineman? Well, they lost a few guys in the spring portal window, 2 guys, so maybe you kind of want to replace those bodies. I think more importantly, they wanted a little bit of depth at the center position because you look at South Carolina and kind of where this depth chart sits right now. I think what it sounds like at least is the program is extremely happy with what they got from Boaz Stanley coming from Troy. That was a guy that another under the radar winter portal window addition that played tackle at times at Troy, wasn't great at tackle, but when he kicked into center, like he played some of his best football at Troy. And so now he's coming to South Carolina, and it sounds like he kind of locked down that potential starting job at center. The problem where South Carolina kind of got into was didn't really have a really reliable center too. And I know they gave Rodney Newsom a look at center. I think that there were some problems with him snapping the football. Hasn't snapped a lot of footballs in his time. Rodney Newsom, that is. Ryan Brubaker, a guy that seemingly just has been kind of banged up for most of his college football career. I think Shane Beamer was looking at it and saying, hey, we can't go into the SEC with only one center we trust to snap the football. We got to go make another addition. Nolan Hay, he's a guy that very similar to Boaz Stanley. And I'll say this, I think Boaz Stanley's probably a better football player, probably going to be your starting center. Nolan Hay, very similar to Boaz Stanley. He's solid at tackle at times, much more comfortable playing in kind of the phone booth center guard combination, much more comfortable playing on the inside than out there on the island at tackle. That's probably how I'd best sum it up. He's a guy that, pretty dang strong at the point of attack, knows how to play with solid pads and leverage. This is a quality center too. And again, when you have only one center that you can kind of rely on, even if Boaz Stanley just has to go out for a drive, like you don't want to have to be like rolling the dice with the center you're trotting out there. And so I think Nolan Hay gives you that center too that you trust a lot. And then I think the other conversation here is he's a guy that has a redshirt year. And I don't think South Carolina's bringing him in to redshirt and be back in 2026, but If Boaz Stanley stays healthy for the whole year and you don't have to play Nolan Hay in 4+ games, you can have him back in 2026, which I think might be a storyline to monitor as well. That sounds like it will do it for South Carolina in the spring transfer portal window. It wasn't the flashiest of spring portal windows for South Carolina, and I don't think it needed to be. Like, very similar to how we talked about this team going back to the winter, the priority for South Carolina was keep the players on this roster through the spring portal window. We don't want to have any guys that we don't want to leave the program leave. And I think largely South Carolina achieved that. Wendell Gregory hits the portal, goes to Oklahoma State. That probably wasn't ideal, but probably not a guy in the 2 deep. Same thing with Cam Pringle. You probably didn't want to lose a guy like Cam Pringle that had 4 years of eligibility remaining, but if he wants the chance to play as a freshman or redshirt freshman, probably wasn't going to be at South Carolina. Thought they did a really good job retaining the guys that were going to start and be in the 2 deep. Then secondly, I think South Carolina kind of told us how they felt about their roster coming out of spring. Wide receiver room. Like, look, we're really happy with the quarterback room. Like Lenore Sellers, Aaron Nolan, what we heard from Cutter Woods. I know Dante Reno transferred out, but I think you got your 3 top quarterbacks. Running back room. Again, waiting on in. I'm going to keep saying this until he gets his waiver approved. How crazy is it that the NCAA has not approved, to my knowledge yet, approved Rasul Faison's waiver to play in the 2025 year? Like, the NFL draft has already happened. What's this kid supposed to do if you tell him he can't play? Like, at this point, I feel like the NCAA has to tell him to pay or play, or else we're going to riot collectively. But I think you're happy with the running back room. It sounds like Rasul Faison, big time hit. Wide receiver room. To my knowledge, South Carolina did not kick around a single wide receiver in the spring portal window. Why is that the case? Look, if South Carolina felt like they needed a wide receiver, I probably Shane Beamer would have went out to the spring transfer portal window and tried to get one. Nick Harbor, really excited about what year 3 is going to look like for him as he kind of focuses on football. Brian Rowe, Malik Clark, you have Donovan Murph coming in the summer. I think South Carolina is sneaky really high on this wide receiver room going into the 2025 year. Now you kind of shored up your offensive line. And again, I know at times there were maybe some reported growing pains for South Carolina on the offensive line. Many of y'all know how I feel about it. I kind of have some blind trust that this can be a pretty dang solid unit. There's a lot of young blue chip talent in this room. Talk about Josiah Thompson, Trevon Baugh, Tree Babalade, even a guy like Marquis Anderson. But more importantly, it's supplemented with a lot of portal additions that have played a lot of football. Boaz Stanley, Nick Sharp, 2-year starter at the ACC at Wake Forest, Nolan Hay, Rodney Newsom. I look at it and say it's a deep unit. It's a talented unit. I think some of the growing pains that we heard about South Carolina's offensive line probably had a little bit more to do with, playing some musical chairs and trying to figure out what your best 5 is going to be. Like Tree Babalade started, spring practice at left tackle, working behind Josiah Thompson, kicks into left guard. Rodney Newsom starts at guard, moves into center. There was a lot of like, hey, let's try to figure out what the best 5 can be. And when you're moving guys all around the offensive line, sometimes it's going to be a little choppy, especially during the spring. For at least me, and I know some South Carolina fans maybe have some apprehensions to really buy into the offensive line, and I understand that because it's been shaky at times over the last couple of years. Watch out for the South Carolina offensive line. I think it has the opportunity to surprise a lot of people, especially in the run game, because I look at this. This is a freaking big offensive line. I mean, Tree Babalade, a massive human being. Boaz Stanley up to 325. Trevon Baugh, we all know he's a big boy. The inside of that offensive line is a big physical bunch, and I think South Carolina is going to want to run the football a lot with Lenore Sellers or Rasul Faison. Going to the defensive side of the football, you had a massive win, Troy Pikes, right? Troy Pikes took visits to Ohio State and Georgia. We knew South Carolina needed to add at least one big body in the middle of that defensive line. I think some South Carolina fans maybe wanted to see 2. Maybe I did as well. But you got one of the best ones available in Troy Pikes. And I know 24/7 Sports are on 3, not super high on Troy Pikes. Guess what? Georgia, Ohio State, they ain't offering this kid and taking him on a visit unless they don't like him a lot too. And so I think this is a kid that maybe the recruiting services don't love, but I think the programs across the country really liked him. And that was a big win for South Carolina. Linebacker. Did South Carolina even look to add one linebacker in the spring portal window? The answer is no. What does that tell us? It's either just really bad management by Shane Beamer saying, hey, our linebacker room stinks, but we're not going to try to fix it. Or, and that's obviously not true, I don't think. I think what the truth is look, we got a lot of talented backers in the room. They haven't played a ton of football, but we know they're talented. Sounds like they probably had a pretty damn good spring. I think South Carolina went out, and then obviously the edge room, like George Wilson, Devon Clowney, two different kind of edge rushers. Devon Clowney, a little bit more of a run stopper, George Wilson, a little bit more of a pass rush specialist, making sure the depth is where it needs to be. I think South Carolina went out in the spring and addressed the positions they needed to address heading into 2025. That's all the spring portal is for. Look, if you're a program that's trying to build your roster in the spring portal window, you probably ain't that good of a program. The spring portal is for filling in the cracks, adding some depth pieces. And I think that's what South Carolina did at the positions they needed to. We'll do like kind of a final grade for South Carolina at some point in the next couple of days. We're going to update this depth chart as well. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.